Let's talk about a story that's so wild, so epic, it sounds like pure fantasy. It's a 2,000-year-old legend that connects the ancient Middle East to the coast of India. For centuries, pretty much everyone dismissed it as a myth, a fantastic tale of faith and adventure. But what if it was all true?
Okay, so let's dive right in. We're talking about the incredible legend of St. Thomas the Apostle. Yep, one of the original 12. The tradition says that after the crucifixion, he didn't just stay in the Middle East. Nope, he supposedly traveled all the way to India to spread his message. For centuries, historians just filed this under nice story, but no way was it real. But what if it's more than that?
So, to really get this whole mystery, you have to understand that there are two totally different pieces to this puzzle. The first is a bunch of ancient text from Mesopotamia, from a city called Edessa. The other is a living, breathing oral tradition, stories and songs passed down for 2,000 years in South India. Now, for the longest time, right, these two stories just didn't seem to fit together. They almost contradicted each other. One talks about a mission way up in what's now Pakistan and Afghanistan. The other is all about the tropical coast of Kerala, way down south. They were seen as beautiful legends, for sure, but not actual history. But, as we're about to see, together, they hold all the clues.
So let's start with the oldest document we have, a book from the 3rd century called the Acts of Thomas. And I've got to be honest, this thing reads more like a fantasy novel than any kind of historical report. I mean, it is wild.
And you can see exactly why historians were so skeptical for so long. The book is just jam-packed with these incredible, over-the-top miracles. We're talking about talking animals, serpents literally reversing their own venom, and protective floods just erupting out of nowhere. It just all felt like pure fiction. This quote really gets to the heart of the main story. So Thomas gets sold as a carpenter to this Indian king who wants a grand physical palace built. But instead of, building it, Thomas takes all the money and gives it to the poor. The king is furious, obviously, but Thomas explains that he has built the king a palace, a much better one, in heaven. It's a really powerful story, but for centuries, that's all anyone thought it was, just a story. And here is the crucial point. For nearly 1,800 years, everyone, scholars, theologians, you name it, believed the characters in this story, especially the king, were completely made up. The king's name in the Acts was Gondophares, and that name appeared absolutely nowhere else. Not in Roman histories, not in Greek texts, not in Indian records, nothing. He was a total ghost, a literary invention made up for the sake of the tale. And this is where our story takes a wild, completely unexpected turn, all thanks to some 19th century archaeologists who were digging around in the dust of what we now call Afghanistan and Pakistan. This was the bombshell. Archaeologists started finding coins with his name on them, and then they found the stone inscription. This didn't just prove King Gondophares was a real person, it placed his reign smack in the middle of the 1st century. That inscription, dated to 46 AD, fits perfectly into the apostolic era, the exact time Thomas would have been on his mission. The ghost king was real. Okay, so wait, if the king was real, where in the world did this totally fantastical story come from? Well, to figure that out, let's head to the city of Edessa and see how this all builds. You have to picture Edessa. It wasn't some quiet town, it was a major hub, a crossroads of trade and culture. It became the intellectual capital for Syriac-speaking Christianity, a real gateway to the East. And its scholars were meticulous record keepers. It's almost certain they compiled the Acts of Thomas based on stories and reports from merchants traveling back and forth on the trade routes from India. And here's the thing. Edessa had a special, personal connection to Thomas. To them, he wasn't just an apostle, he was their apostle. He was the head of the entire Christian mission to the East, and they believed he was personally responsible for their city's conversion. So for them, holding on to the story of his mission to India wasn't just about history, it was about their own identity. All right, now let's jump continents. We're leaving the dusty archives of Mesopotamia and traveling thousands of miles south to the coast of India. This is where a completely different version of the story has been kept alive for 2,000 years. Not in books, but in songs and in spoken traditions. The tradition in South India is incredibly specific. It says Thomas landed at the port of Muziris in the year 52 AD and established 7 distinct communities and churches. So yeah, the two traditions seem to conflict on the geography, north versus south. But here's the crucial thing they both agree on. The main character is Thomas, and he was ultimately martyred in India. So you have to be wondering, how could these two communities, so far apart, be connected? The answer is language. It's amazing. For over 1,000 years, the St. Thomas Christians of South India used Syriac as their sacred language, the exact same language that was spoken in Edessa. And these manuscripts, written right there in India, are the hard, physical proof of that deep, unbreakable connection.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. In the year 1301, over 1,000 years later, a Christian community on the Indian coast is still writing its holy books in the same language as the church in far-off Mesopotamia. That's not just a legend, that's an incredible, unbroken chain of cultural history. But the connection wasn't just about text and language. It gets even more intense. It became physical, in one of the most remarkable events of the early church that really brings our two stories crashing together. Listen to this. It's from a poem by Saint Ephrem, the most famous writer in Edessa. He's not just telling a poetic story here, he is celebrating a huge, real-world event. The physical body of the apostle, his actual bones, had been brought all the way from India back home to Edessa. And so the whole story comes full circle. Thomas's mission starts in the Middle East and ends with his death in India. Then, centuries later, his physical remains are brought back west to Edessa by a merchant. This act solidified his legend and turned the city into a massive pilgrimage site. It's an incredible final journey.
So in the end, when you piece it all together, the archaeology that proves the king was real, the ancient texts from Edessa, and the living traditions from South India, a story that was once written off as pure myth suddenly snaps into focus as a plausible historical reality. And that changes everything. It suggests the connections between East and West were far deeper, and that Christianity's global footprint was established much earlier than we ever thought.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other ancient myths are out there that are actually just histories, waiting for their own key clue, that one lost coin or that one forgotten text, to bring them back to life? Thanks for joining me.